Troy the Odyssey is a movie about, well, Troy and the Odyssey. If you don't know what it is, then you should probably go back to school because it's a very famous Greek story. It's obviously based on the poem by Homer, which is, no, not that Homer, this guy. One of the most famous Greek poets of all time, in fact one of the most famous poets of all time. However, this movie is no historical epic drama. It is a hilariously low budget and small scale movie, as I would expect from the Asylum Productions, which is a famous blockbuster rip-off production company. They're famous for making Sharknado, by the way. Set in 1174 BC after 10 years of fighting in the Trojan War, and like I said, this is a ridiculously small scale movie, so the entire army is like 10 people and they just circulate them throughout, so once they get killed they just change their clothes and come back as soldiers or whatever. So it's pretty funny, this movie. It's obviously, they win the war because of the giant Trojan horse that they hide inside, and then they get wheeled inside of the fortress and they attack at night and kill all the Trojans and take over the fortress and win the war for 10 long years because Odysseus used his brain and created the Trojan horse. After winning the war, finally after 10 long years, he decides to return home to his pregnant wife and obviously his kingdom of Ithaca. But he's cursed by the Trojans and they have unleashed the Kraken to destroy him as revenge. Although the Kraken can't attack any of the Trojans, so he kidnaps a girl called Circe, who is a sorceress for the Trojans, and takes her hostage with his 3 crew members on their tiny little dinghy boat, which they are going to use to travel the ocean all the way back to Ithaca, apparently. I don't know how they actually got here, but surely it can't be this ridiculously small boat. It's so comedic. I mean, where would they even store the food or the fresh water? There's no below decks that they can store anything, and they can't even lie down properly. There's not enough room. This is so ridiculous. Not to mention the fact that, how are they supposed to survive just the vast ocean in general? What if there's a storm? Just like one tiny wave and they flip over and they all drown? Either way, this begins the long journey to return home, and you probably already know the story. So after months on this ridiculously small raft, this tiny little dinghy, they encounter a strange island with pink mist surrounding it, and obviously Circe, who's the sorceress that they kidnapped, explains that it's where the sirens live and you gotta stay away from it. But Odysseus, he doesn't listen, and he forces his men to put wax in their ears so they can't hear the cries of the sirens, and makes them tie him to the mast. I mean, that's a twig, that's not a mast, that's a twig. You can easily get out of that. You couldn't even break it if he wanted to. And that's exactly what he does. He hears the cries of the sirens and they talk to him and they pretend to be his wife and whatever. And so he breaks free of his binds and jumps into the water, and that's exactly what the crew members do as well. They just follow him and go into the water and swim to the island. Not to mention the fact that they were talking to each other while still having the wax in their ears. But luckily is also able to let them talk to each other without blocking out each other's voices. So I guess, you know, dual utility, I guess. The magical siren creature on the island, who's like an immortal goddess type person, she falls in love with Odysseus and basically tries to make him into her husband, I guess. Either way, he eventually breaks free and decides he wants to return home, and Circe helps him, and they rescue everybody and they leave. It went on way too long. It was just like a weird dreamy sort of situation, and then they just leave. So that's fun. Either way, they move on and they encounter finally the big beast, the terrible CGI monstrosity, which is the one-eyed beast. At this point you might be thinking, oh my god, how are they going to get out of this one? It's a huge giant creature, how are they going to get around it?
Actually, it's going to be super easy. Barely an inconvenience. Oh, really?
That's right, they just give it some salt stuff and stab it, and that's it. After a few minor missions like that, they finally get home to the homeland of Ithaca. That's where his pregnant wife has now grown up and, well, his son, a pregnant son. No, not a pregnant son, god damn it. When she was pregnant with her son, she gave birth, and then her son grew up. And Odysseus, now inside of Ithaca, is making his way to the palace, and that's where he encounters his son. Now, during all these years, basically the other men, the knights, whatever the hell they're called, they've been pressuring the queen to marry again, because the king needs to rule in the royal seat, and so far she's being the only one there, and the kid wasn't of age, so he wouldn't be able to rule. So they were all pressuring her to marry one of them, and she was pushing them off for years and years, and finally today she said, fine, I'll give you a challenge to string my husband's bow and shoot it through 5 golden loops, and whoever can do that, I will marry them. Although she has no intention of doing so, she wants to poison herself while they're, you know, dealing with figuring out who's going to be the next king. Once inside the palace with his son, he realizes that none of the people are able to actually string his bow, so to prove he is the king, because they don't believe him, he looks like a homeless guy and they believe the king died many years ago, he actually does it, he strings the bow, shoots it through the 5 hours, and then they realize he's in fact Odysseus, returned back from the dead. So they try to kill him this time for good because they don't want him coming back, they want to be king instead. And he obviously manages to kill them all with the help of Circe's, and the kerfuffle downstairs makes the queen realize, hang on a minute, something's going on. She doesn't poison herself right away, she comes downstairs and they become reunited once again and live happily ever after, is what I would say. But there's obviously a kraken still outside waiting for them. So the kraken starts emerging and doing its shit, making a bunch of noise. And so they run outside to try and stop the kraken. And Circe sacrifices herself because the kraken is not allowed to kill any Trojan citizens, only Odysseus and all the other enemies. So she saves everyone essentially and gets buried. The end. Credits. Thank you so much for watching. This was a really bad movie. I gotta say, it's not the worst adaptation of Odysseus. At least it's not a big budget Hollywood movie, especially not one that was created in modern times that would be directed for modern audiences, so everything would be woke and gay and
the message.
Men would be super weak in this version. At least it pretty much stuck to the lore, but it was a very low budget movie, so what can you expect? It wasn't very good. It's to be expected. See you next time.